So, Mark, give us a sense of what took place at the Global Climate Action Summit. What exactly is that?
Global Climate Action Summit is a kind of a midway summit between the historic Paris Agreement Summit that occurred December in 2015, and then a follow-up summit in 2020 that is also scheduled for the United Nations. The California Summit was not officially a UN summit, so there were no national government commitments announced there. But what happened here in San Francisco was a gathering of what is called the sort of subnational actor group. So those are cities, states, from all over the world, not just across the United States, in businesses, etc., coming together to say, in the wake of Donald Trump wanting to pull out of the Paris Agreement, all of these other subnational actors are saying, we're still in, we're going to do what's necessary to reach the climate goals enunciated at Paris.
Has that concept of subnational actors, has that, maybe it's just simply, the level of how granularly I have paid attention to this, but has that grown in relevance because of Trump, or are there other factors that have led to that, or is it simply consistent with the way it was?
All of the above. It's certainly grown because of Trump, but it was already in existence. As I reported in my Nation magazine piece, I covered the Paris Summit in 2015, and Jerry Brown, the governor of California, went there. He had already begun organizing this international coalition. At that point, it was called the Under 2 Coalition, meaning under 2 degrees Celsius. That's the goal that is set out in the Paris Agreement. And Brown at that point had organized, I forget the exact number, I think it was like 39 different state and local governments and some national governments from around the world to say, we're going to keep it at under 2 degrees. Of course, when Donald Trump in 2017 announced that he wanted to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, that gave additional impetus and urgency to this very same trajectory. And so a lot more states and regions have come on subsequently to that.
All right. So we have seen sort of Donald Trump, I guess, create a new market. How from an efficacy standpoint, is that a good, I mean, is that from the perspective of people who want to try and mitigate or avoid global warming, I guess, to the extent that we can at this point, is that a good development that we are seeing more localized efforts than relying on national governments, which may have a lot of different constituencies that are hard to get to the table?
You can't substitute one for the other. It's unfortunate that we need this kind of involvement from the state and local governments because of the action of the Trump administration. But we definitely still need national governments. Even at the summit last week, when Governor Brown and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg were kind of boasting in a non-offensive way, but they were bragging about what their work had done with subnational groups. Even they acknowledge we can't get there. We can't get to where we need to go globally to prevent catastrophic climate change without very, very active and much more ambitious action on the part of national governments. We're doing what we can in the meantime in hopes that the U.S. federal system will come back into the climate accords as soon as possible. But no, there's no substituting. Look, the United States is the biggest economy in the world, and while Jerry Brown is right that Donald Trump doesn't speak for all the power centers, it's still very important when the federal government is trying to pull in the exact opposite direction of what the rest of the world wants to do on this.
Is there anything that is? I mean, I want to get to obviously what took place there, but in terms of dynamic, is there anything? Is there any dynamic analogous to California's relationship to the United States when it comes to global warming? I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of, cafe standards for cars, for instance, where because California is such a huge economy that they can dictate the practices of some major industries and how they function outside of the state because they are required to function a certain way within the state. And it just becomes more economical for these companies to function like they do in California across the board. I mean,
that's exactly what's happening here. We wouldn't be covering this climate summit in California if California were not the fifth biggest economy in the world. Jerry Brown is the de facto governor of a global economic superpower. If you look down the list, the biggest economy internationally is the U.S., then China, then Japan, then Germany, and then California. So when California says, as Governor Brown did this last week, that we are going to go completely carbon neutral by the year 2045, and we're going to have completely carbon-free electricity by the year 2045, that sends an enormous message, not just to other governments, but arguably even more powerfully to investors and businesses around the world, saying that, wow, this is where the future is going. And as you mentioned, Sam, again, it's because California has done this so many times in the past. It's simply too big a market for automakers or you name it to ignore. And that's why, historically, once California got the right under federal law to set its own emission standards for air pollution, basically the car industry, the U.S. industry in Detroit said, okay, we give up. We're not going to keep fighting this. We don't want to have to make one set of cars for California. That's 45% of all the cars we sell in America. We're not going to make one set for them and one set for the rest. It's inefficient with our factories. So that's why California has driven so much environmental innovation over the years, and I expect that's exactly what's going to be happening as a result of these new developments at the summit.
How much of California's autonomy in that regard is in jeopardy? I mean, I know in the context, particularly of the CAFE standards, that the Trump administration was trying to override those standards, those emission standards by California. Now, certainly during the Bush administration, I think it was the Clean Skies Initiative actually required states to lower the threshold, expand the amount of mercury that companies could put into the air. How safe is that structure where California has the ability to set, standards in terms of emissions?
Right. That's a very timely question, Sam, because that's at play right now. And in fact, Mary Nichols, who heads the California Air Resources Board, was present at a number of the sessions at the summit talking about this. And it's true that the Trump administration is trying to basically browbeat California into not having its own emission standards. But California argues back, look, this is settled federal law. You can't do this, and we will sue you if necessary. What's interesting is the backstory. And according to Mary Nichols and others, but she's speaking on the record, the U.S. auto industry is not in favor of what Trump is trying to do here. The U.S. auto industry does not support withdrawing California's waiver and California's freedom to set its own laws here. And now, why would the industry do that? Probably because they know, that all of their existing plant and investments are already established on the basis that we're going to make one car for all of North America. We're not going to make one for California and one for the rest of the country. But also, and here's me speculating, I haven't reported this, but I assume that these car companies are smart enough to look into the future. All of their investments pay out over years, not just months. And they probably know that, Donald Trump's approach to these issues is not going to be a long-lasting one. And so they're not going to support overturning this waiver in the short term when, either 2 years or 4 years from now, there's going to be very different policy signals coming out from Washington.
That's fascinating. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the actual advancements, to the extent that there were any, at the Global Climate Action Summit. And I also want to just touch on that idea of how folks can lead on this topic by simply signaling to where things are going. And that anticipation is, in many respects, regulatory in and of itself. We got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. I'll be right back with Mark Hertsgaard in a moment.